Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am very excited to introduce you to today's podcast guest. I am just starstruck to have him on here. I'd like you to welcome Dr. Charles Porter. He is a distinguished real estate expert, very well known in the farm and ranch realm as the expert in our field and education. He has over 47 years experience in this business and has been helping agents and clients, I'm sure, for probably longer than that. Dr. Porter, welcome so much. I can't wait to dive in and learn a little bit more. There's so much that you have done, not just your experience, but being an expert witness and a consult in over 700 cases nationwide. I just want to thank you and welcome you, but I can't wait to dive into what all that means. So go ahead and please, you introduce yourself and explain the importance of that information.
Hi. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, Lindsay. This is fun. One of my passions is teaching, and I've always had a special place in my heart for farm and ranch and land activity. I grew up in Austin. Our family came to Texas in 1839. My mother's family came in 1875. They were farmers in Williamson County. So I've always been kind of close to the land, even though I grew up in Austin. I've spent a lot of my time on farms and ranches, had a ranch in Mexico for many years. And then I have a farm in Wilson County on Cibolo Creek that I've had now for 25 years. One of my true passions is anytime someone asks me to come visit a ranch and walk around, I pretty much will jump through hoops to get there. There's nothing more important than being out in Texas in the spring. And I guess I'm a little less active in August now because it's been a little warm lately. But other than that, I really do enjoy it. I have several degrees, a degree at finance from the University of Texas. I have a master's degree in liberal arts from St. Edward's University. But in that, they allowed me to design my program to write my first book, which is about the history of water rights in Texas. And then I decided to go to Spain, where water rights were developed around Valencia, and got my PhD from there. So I kind of approach all farm and ranch activities, and especially the most important part of the value of the real estate is water, from a very historical point of view. As a real estate broker, there's nothing more important and more helpful than to understand the history of the property you're trying to help someone purchase. I'm going over in a little while to a ranch that the family's owned since, if you can believe it, 1854. And, those ranches are still around in Texas. And I did some research for him before I'm coming. I've got topo maps and history of the ranch and things he didn't know about. So it's kind of what I really enjoy. And I guess the last thing I'll say, the Austin Board of Realtors asked me to write a farm and ranch class back in 2001, 2002. I began to teach it then and have updated and modified it, lengthened it, shortened it back and forth ever since in every regard, manner, shape, and fashion. One of the things I truly enjoy is teaching that class around the state, especially in the smaller communities. They seem to really appreciate it. The food's always great. And when I sit in front of the legislative committee with sometimes members of the legislature that are even from their own district, I know better what their district's thinking because I've been there in 8-hour classes and listened to what they had to say. So it's a huge joy for me.
Wow, I mean, you're pretty much your family going that far back. I mean, a son of the Republic, founding member of family of Texas. It's amazing to see that heritage and your passion shines through. I've been to several of your classes, and I love the fact that you start with history because the foundation is very important. And speaking of that foundation, how do you approach kind of the education and training of these farm and ranch professionals in the sector, in that particular sector? And what do you ensure, in your classes, and what do you try to emphasize on to help meet the industry demands?
Sure. I'm first of all try to emphasize that when they come to my class, and one of the things students are often mistaken about or confused about, they come in thinking both as a broker or an agent and also an investor. And I try to make them understand up front that we're here to talk about your duties as a real estate license holder. And why is there a difference there? Well, the difference there is that if you're just purely investing in real estate for yourself, you only owe duty to yourself and the law. But if you're a broker, an agent, you owe the duty to your clients. Your clients' interests have to be first. It's a very big difference. And then as I'll go through, I try to make sure that they completely understand the Texas Occupations Code, Chapter 1101, the Real Estate License Act, the rules of the Texas Real Estate Commission. And if they're a member of a local board, a member of the National Association of Realtors, I want them to understand the Code of Ethics and Standard of Practice. You know, NAR sets the industry standards for the United States since 1913 in ethical behavior. Now, there are differences between state laws, but it's very, very strong. And when I teach the NAR ethics class, I'm probably the only one in Texas that ties it back to our Texas statutes. In fact, I don't like the way NAR prepares the curriculum. They don't cover all 17 articles. Once I go through and help everybody understand each time the context of each area that I'm talking about, say from contracts to mineral rights to survey and everything, I try to make them understand how it relates back to their duties under the License Act and the rules. And then I can pepper it with the real life experience, not only of being involved in farm and ranch brokerage for years, owning a farm and ranch in different places, but also where they've got to defend themselves in the lawsuits that may happen. I want them to understand, here's what the rules are, but here's the way the jury looks at things. Here's the way the judge may look at things. And sometimes the judges, I really do think, especially at the appeals court, I think the judges don't hold realtors, license holders' feet to the fire as much as they should. I really think when you think about under your fidelity, you're under fidelity 531.2 of the Rules of Real Estate Commission, you know, you've got to be scrupulous, meticulous. And those are scary definitions. And I wonder sometimes when the appeals court rules maybe differently than I think they think that's too heavy a burden for the real estate agent. But they need to speak up and change it at the TREC level. I was the co-author of Legal 1 and Legal 2 in 22-23, and they asked me to do, I told them I'd do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want a water rights chapter, which I wrote. I want to do the mineral rights chapter, which I wrote. And I also want to do an ad valorem tax chapter. But additionally, I want to be working on the agency chapter. And I brought it up. I said, you know, we still have defined, 531.2 says that we're fiduciaries for our clients, right? Which put their interests ahead of ours. We also have to treat other parties or transaction fairly. However, we also have to deal with details in a scrupulous and meticulous manner. Now, I said, look, we didn't define scrupulous and meticulous. We wrote the Code of Ethics for the Rules of the Real Estate Commission in 1976. We didn't define them until 2010 in the version 4.0 of that class. And we continued to carry on the scrupulous and meticulous definition, which I won't go into exact detail with, but it basically says you've got to prove to the jury that you used extreme or excessive care for your client. There's a moral aspect of being scrupulous. You have a moral duty to do things right. And so I said, look, we've had it in some of the manuals. The courts haven't defined it, so we need to define it again in 2022. And they all the co-authors and TREC folks agreed. So we put that definition back in like we did in 2010. I think it's a great definition. I still sometimes in my classes will have my students fill out a survey at the end. And I'll ask them, you know, should we have fiduciary duties? And the good news is, overall, the 20-something years I've been teaching this class, 22 or 3, 85% of the students say yes. And the reason fiduciary duties are important, that makes us a profession, right? It's a very big part of our profession. In other words, how can you be an agent for someone else and put your interests ahead of them? How can you put your 3 or 6%, whatever interest is, ahead of the 94 or 97% interest? You know, a lot of agents get in trouble because they take over the transaction, and I hate to say it, but you're the tail wagging the dog. You've got a duty to your client above all else. But in the same token, you also have to treat the other parties fairly. And a lot of people kind of don't understand that. if you look at NAR Code of Ethics Article 1, it's very similar to our Fidelity 531.2, but it says you have to treat other parties honestly. I've actually had people discuss with me the difference between honest and fair. And I don't think there's a lot of difference there. So, NAR parallels our Code of Ethics there. Let's talk a little bit about fiduciary duties. The second time that our Code of Ethics say we're fiduciaries, at the Rules and Real Estate Commission, is 535.2. It says a broker has the very highest fiduciary duty. Okay, that makes it real clear. And then there's another time, 535.156, that says all agents, make it even more clear, you have a fiduciary duty to your client. And I added into the broker responsibility manual, the current one that I was co-author of, I said, look, we need to add this phrase. If Trek tells you you've got fiduciary duties 3 times, they mean it. And we added that phrase. And I think it's really critical to add value to our transactions, to give us the opportunity to continue to add value. As Lindsay, you've heard me talk about, if we don't add value to these transactions, then there are people out there, I'm not knocking Zillow or Jeff Bezos or any of them, but they'd like to come in and take over this industry. I don't think they've done it yet because they don't realize how complicated their duties are from state to state. But it's out there. And so, again, fiduciary duties are critical. It's very clear in our rules that we have fiduciary duties to our client. Now, another part of that, which I think is equally a part of fiduciary duties, and I teach this through all my classes, is 531.3. See, our duties, our Code of Ethics Trek are fidelity, integrity, and competency. Integrity's never changed since 1976. That means you've got to do something, prudence and caution, so as to avoid misrepresentation in any wise by acts of commission or omission. So acts of commission you can kind of understand, but you better really be nuanced and understand the business you're in, especially farm and ranch, that omission part of it. Okay. What's an example of omission in farm and ranch? And I'm sure we'll talk more about water later on, but if you're in, say you're out in around Floresville and you're representing a farm and ranch client, whether you're selling or buying, the buying client, you probably need to realize it's an omission if you don't realize that you're in the Evergreen Groundwater Conservation District. And that district has rules and regulations over how you use that groundwater. So if you ignore that for your buying client or you ignore it for your selling client, that's that omission thing can pop up and hit you. And there's all kinds of other things to talk about there. But integrity, we all talk about it. We've been in a crisis of integrity since 2008 across this country. A lot of folks that did, I think, some things that weren't full of integrity up in New York didn't go to jail for it. I'm still frustrated about that. And I think once you get that almost hysterical attitude across the United States, I'm seeing more and more people not acting with integrity. We've had leaders not act with integrity. I don't care which side of the fence they're on. And I think that it's so critical for your relationship with your client. You put their interests first, and you do everything you can to not only to think about how they can assess their risk in selling or buying. Now, I'm going through a long kind of narrative here. Maybe you want to interrupt me and ask some questions. I can do this.
You have been answering the questions like before it's even popping into my head. Really, this is for y'all that are listening. This is what he does best. He is a wealth of knowledge. You have hit the major nails on the head. I am glad and just over the moon as a broker myself and someone that's been a full-time farm and ranch agent since 2015. That is all I do. I do not sell houses. I may sell a house on a ranch, but I refer that business because my expertise is in what I want to do day to day, in and out, live and breathe, the dirt and the aquifers and the water and the wildlife. This is my fingers on that pulse. So when I have an agent that says, hey, I have a client, he wants to buy this ranch. And I'm like, well, you just have the client. That's a referral. But I want in the deal. Okay, well, if competency of the deal equals commission, if we get sued, how much of that liability are you taking? I said, are you going to be responsible for a $3 million lawsuit? Because I know I can stand in front of a judge and I can give them my years of experience, and I can just regurgitate information, and I've lived it. And so, that's when I say, well, why do you want to keep half the deal? And it comes down to the money. And I'm like, I said, what does Trek say? And I regurgitate what you say. You have had such a big influence on me, but I let them know if they said it 3 times, it must mean something.
That's right. And I think it's important that if you really want to be, instead of a part-time broker agent, if you really are a dedicated professional, you've got to understand those rules set out our goals and our standards that are very, very important. The other thing that you mentioned, competency, and that's the third leg of our mandatory code of ethics from Trek, again, came in 1976. And we finally modified it. First time we modified it was in 2019. We added geographic competency. And that really doesn't have a lot to do with topography. It has to do with geographic competency. And there's a lot of reasons why it happened. And I think it was a good thing. Shortly thereafter, I was chairman of the Education Standards Advisory Committee at Trek. And when I was vice chairman, we get a letter from Governor Abbott. We basically said that we need to be lighten up a little bit on licensing activities, and to definitely lighten up on people coming in from other states to do business in Texas. And the reaction to the legislature was, that's great, but we're going to add competency there. So somebody coming in from Nevada needs to be competent in Texas. I mean, that's kind of where it was from. It had other things to do with Senator Buckingham was angry with Trek and under a bunch of things, but I thought it was a good thing. And for years, we've always known that since as a broker, you're responsible for all, and I want to stress, all the actions of your agents that you sponsor, then it's critical that you understand you've got to assess their competency. You can't allow a single-family residential person who seems to always be in love with commercial work, which I've discouraged many of them from doing it because it's not a lovely work. You don't get paid a lot of times. You don't have an MLS system. You don't get buyer's rep agreements. It's very difficult, like on an office building or something. You've got to be competent to do that business. In fact, I wrote an article in Texas Realtor Magazine very shortly after the geographic competency change in 2019 that's pretty long and detailed about what I thought about geographic competency, what it meant, how it changed. In fact, we put that as an addendum in the appendix of the Legal 1, Legal 2 manual. And that competency, we've got tools out there. A lot of people don't assess their competency. I'm involved in some things right now where it's shocking that some major brokers let some agents do some things that they were clearly not competent about, and they have no proof they tried to assess them because they didn't try to assess the competency. And it's so simple. Texas Realtors provides you with a one-time fee forever, a guideline, an office manual. How do you deal with your agents and all the different aspects of it and how to assess their competency? Now, again, if you're trying to be a professional, the better attorneys will tell you, hey, Charles, I don't know a thing about mineral rights. I can't possibly work on it. I tried to get one of the smartest justices of the Texas Supreme Court to come with me down to the Texas State Historical Association convention and talk about water. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, Charles, I don't know enough about water rights in Texas. I don't have time to get up to date like you are. Well, I appreciated that. And I think I think to me, Lindsay, the most complicated transaction in Texas, you're going to be shocked about this, it's not selling an apartment project, not selling an office building, not selling a residential property or a retail center. It's farm and ranch. There's so many elements there that are absolutely critical that you don't face anywhere else. So that competency aspect is important.
I am 100% in agreement with you because I have this. Well, and it's not just a farm and ranch transaction. In my mind, it's a Texas farm and ranch transaction. The layers of aquifers that we have and the water conservation districts. If you just start on that layer alone, every county is different. And, it's like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like when you talk about geographical competency, I've had an agent tell me, well, I live in the county, you don't. And I said, well, you know what? I know more about your county because I've actually practiced in it. I know how to find the information. If I don't have the information, if there's a resource, if there is a person that's an expert, an attorney that's an expert in that field, I have their phone numbers to call them because I have done this job, not just in theory, not just in a classroom. CEs, continuing education is beautiful, but it's a lot of these people go and get, all these accreditations. And I said, well, that's great in theory. I said, but think about it, when you were in school and you had chemistry, you also had the lab. You also learned it. You would learn it hands on. And there's a video of you and you talk about you have to walk the land. And I am dumbfounded on not only will an agent not even ride the land in a buggy, but there's some agents that don't even step foot on the property and still write a contract. Right. And in my mind, I am like, it is clear as day. Like you say, there is some very clear-cut guidelines. And unfortunately, I'm going to take it back to the brokers. At the end of the day, if you're a broker, I'm a broker. I took the test. I did the work. They require us to over and over again take the broker responsibility course. And I'm like, if you're a broker and you have failed to teach the agents that you sponsor, that's on you.
Absolutely.
And I do tell the agents on our team, I said, listen, the more you know, the more you grow. You have to teach yourself, all the food's out on the table. You got to go get it. And no one's going to make you eat. And is it uncomfortable? Are you unsure? Absolutely. But there's no excuse for you to take a client that you cannot 100% service in a transaction. Because if I get into a transaction and we're halfway in and I got to call someone, a consult, an attorney, another agent, I'm pulling them into that deal because I want them fiduciary. I want them responsible. Sure. I want their E&O insurance to cover what I didn't know.
Absolutely.
So, I love that you're here because there's a lot of things happening with the National Association of Realtors, even though it had to do with residential. There's a lot of perception and miscommunications and misunderstanding about what you can and can't, or what you should and shouldn't do. Right. And to have you on here, at least talking about our Texas rules and regulations. Because I tell people all the time, I said, listen, I know this sounds amazing and beautiful and mysterious and exciting, but are you willing to lose your house over it?
Yeah, no, we're fully responsible for it. And we have an extra, you talk about the state of Texas. Yeah, I'm licensed in Texas. But I'll tell you something, there's a big difference between doing business in Houston County and Crockett, Texas, and being out in Presidio. We're not Rhode Island. We have a vast difference from the Golden Triangle of Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange, all the way over to El Paso. They're vast differences.
We got counties the size of Rhode Island.
Yeah, that's right. And everything's different. I mean, we have a tremendous different business culture in each county. Now, they all work within the framework of Texas law, but there's a different culture. And as I've testified around the state as an expert witness, there's a different judicial culture. The judges look at different things down in Rockport than they do in Houston. They handle the pace of the trials in Houston very differently than they do in San Antonio. It's a very different state. When you start talking about water, I've been working on water deals and helping people on water deals up in the Panhandle and the High Plains. And I'm also working down in the lower Rio Grande Valley and way out in the Presidio area. It's a tremendous difference in every way, manner, shape, form, and fashion, not just nature-wise, but the way people treat each other, the way their own kind of standards, industry standards in areas. That's why Texas is so hard. When I hear an agent say, "Oh, I've got a license, I can go out to Bernie and do a farm and ranch." So you've driven out there once, and you grew up over in somewhere in Tyler, Texas, and you think you can go out there and walk in and represent somebody in Bernie? No, you can't. And that is it's on the broker. And if the broker isn't competent, the broker's got to find somebody that's competent to teach the broker. I'm telling you right now, I've had people literally in my classes look at me, and I'll never forget an older gentleman. He had become the sponsoring broker for about 100 agents. And I kept going over with him his personal responsibility for that. And I think he was doing it kind of for, I assume, not a lot of money. He didn't really spend a lot of time with the agents. It's almost like he was a figurehead. And when I made it clear to him that every dime of his assets are at risk for some mistake they made, they didn't even have independent contractor agreements. They had nothing that limited that agent in things they would do. Now, a few years ago, it used to say that, you're responsible for all the authorized acts of an agent. But if you don't define the authorized acts, guess what? You're responsible for all of them. I defended a broker here one time who sponsored a builder's sales license. The builder seemed to want to have a sales license for some reason. I guess to monkey with the commissions. I don't know. He's building an $800,000 house. I'd be more worried about the profit on the house. Well, the house flooded. And guess what? They sued the broker also because he didn't limit that responsibility. There's a point coming in Texas that, if enough errors and omissions coverage is paid out, they don't have to write policies in Texas, just like Allstate and State Farm they're not compelled to write policies in Florida. And I've said that for a long time. And so, in fact, I've gotten on my knees literally, Lindsay, one time and on a case. It was a rumor case. I wanted the insurance company, let's go to trial. Let's prove that we don't have to discuss a rumor. We have a duty to tell the truth. And guess what? They settled and gave this person money for nothing because they're scared to death of juries because, sadly, the juries, as you can see from the big judgment against NAR, don't like brokers and agents. And that's terribly unfair, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I agree. It's terribly unfair. And I now that we've kind of shifted to the topic of court and litigation, I really want to ask. I want to ask you a handful of questions on that because I think there's a lot of things that agents really just nuts and bolts don't understand. How great their license and their livelihoods can be impacted. So when you say that you have been a part of 700 cases, what does that mean exactly?
I have been a named expert in now it's about 740 cases now since 87. What it means is that someone will call me, an attorney, 99% of the time it's the attorney who's heard about me and ask me, give me a general description of the lawsuit, ask me if I could render an extra opinion about certain scopes of work. An expert witness, a true expert witness duty is not to who's hiring him. The duty is to the judge and jury to help the judge and jury understand not the legal aspect of it. The judge understands that, but how that is interpreted by the industry and how it's carried out through the industry. And so I'll be hired as an expert witness to maybe give an opinion letter. I'll look at hundreds of documents, sometimes tens of thousands of documents. They'll define a scope of the work. Sometimes it's as simple as the conduct of this real estate broker. Sometimes it's more complicated. It could be a property management case. The conduct of the property manager in the case of the shooting in the apartment parking lot, things like that. Broker's price opinions, all that. So what you do then is an expert witness looks at the documents and tells the party that's hired him or he or she, what their real opinions about it. Sometimes I'll have insurance companies call me up and ask me to look at the property through their lawyers. Just give us an opinion of what the position is that we should take in this case. And sometimes I'll tell them, you got no chance in this case. Your person had actual knowledge of a defect. And under 1101.652 B3 and 4 of the Occupation Code, they have to disclose that defect. And I'm sitting here looking at 2 emails and letters saying they knew about that cracked slab and didn't disclose it. So my suggestion is you better try to settle this case because you get in front of a jury, it's going to be worse. And you don't want to go through 4 years of discovery and all those expenses when you don't have a chance out there. So, that's one thing an expert witness does. Another thing that an expert witness does is they'll ask you to write an opinion letter, and that is to define the scope of the work and then come back with your opinion. And a good opinion letter bases it in fact, just like you write a dissertation or anything else. You footnote everything and you go back and say, okay, here's what happened. Here's what this person did. Here's the evidence of what this person did. Here's the testimony of what this person did. And you footnote all those sources and sites. In other words, you're really looking at the case from a point of view almost as if you're a juror who's doing their duty. And I mean, there are many times that the folks that hire me don't like what I come up with on my opinion sometimes. But my duty is to judge and jury. Now, the good news is, since in the mid-'80s, all cases have to go to mediation at least once. So of that 740-something cases, 80% of it settled before we went to trial. But many times, oftentimes, almost every time, once I give an opinion, first they will name me and designate me with the courts, and then I'll give an opinion letter. Sometimes I don't. Most of the time I do. Then they take my deposition. And now it used to be as long as they wanted. Now it's limited to 6 hours. But I'm telling you, I mean, you can't even put a comma out of place, you know. But that's, again, to me, it's been, I guess, fun for me. It's a mental challenge for me. It makes me a better broker. It makes me a much better teacher because I've got to get everything right. You know, just like if you've ever written a journal article in a peer-reviewed academic journal, I mean, you're going to be scrutinized to the level that is almost ridiculous level. But you have to look at it that way and say that editing, that review makes you better. And if the better you are, the more efficient you are, the more truthful you are, the more expert you are, the better you serve your client, which then better serves the public, right? I think that's the way I look at it.
I wanted to dive into something that unfortunately agents don't realize until it's too late. I've been a part of a lawsuit, and something that I think agents don't realize is that just because you're done with the transaction, you're not done.
Right.
Those clients, the buyer and the seller, have, 3-4 years to possibly come back and sue anybody in a part of that transaction for any reason.
That's right. And it can't. And when that time tolls from changes in situations, they may not discover what's going on for another year. Then you've got 3 or 4 years after that. So no, it's a whole. You know, the statute of limitations is not easy to understand, frankly.
I agree, and I let them know that too. I'm like, listen, I've been in some. At the end, it was terrible, and I'm like, now I got 4 years for someone to have buyer's remorse. And then the other half of it, which I like to explain to agents, another misconception is that, listen, you're the target, buddy. It doesn't matter if the seller's right or the buyer's wrong. I said, I promise you, in my opinion, attorney 101 is go after the agent and their errors and omissions insurance.
Well, and that's right. I mean, you know, it's like Bum Phillips, the old coach of the Oilers, said. He says there's 2 kinds of professional football coaches, them that's fired and them that's going to be fired. If you've been in the real estate business long enough as a broker, unless you're just very, very careful, eventually you're going to get dragged into a lawsuit, whether you've done anything wrong or not, because the attitude out there is let's throw mud at everybody and see if any of it sticks. And when you've got errors and omissions coverage, folks, like I've said, that they know will probably not want to go to court. It's kind of simple. You know, it's that what a lot of times, I hate to be so cynical, but I see a lot of people sue the broker because they know that the errors and omissions insurance company will make them an offer quickly on, and they'll use that money to pay the other legal fees.
Absolutely.
So you've heard me talk in class about how you have to consider every time you sit down with a client, kind of like when you go into a new doctor's office, they give you a clipboard with all your history, and part of that's how they're going to get paid. And so I know it's a pain to journal everything you do with a client, but even if it's your brother or sister, you got to be careful and remember, you need to put everything in writing and think from day one, how can I prepare to defend myself if somebody doesn't like me in this transaction later on, whether I've done anything wrong or not. And the way you do that is keep accurate notes, keep everything in writing, prove with documentation everything you do for folks, and understand not that they're mean and ugly. People are just funny about their money. And I mean, it's the way it is. So is it a pain to keep a journal? Absolutely. But in the new modern world, you know, you've got texts that you can send. You've got emails you can send. You can document everything a lot easier than back in the 70s and 80s, you know.
When you guys really had a paper and pencil.
Oh, it was a nightmare. We you know, as a developer, I'd be buying property and have 45 days to close in Houston on property close to River Oaks and down and around the Galleria. You know, we're waiting for the, the documents to be prepared when we're sitting at the title company table the day of closing. You might get something FedEx, but there was nothing by email. And so you were having hard copies of 500 pages of documents sent back and forth for 2 weeks. It's a whole new world. And I think that young folks may not understand how lucky they have it now to be able to keep up with those documents. Again, you've heard me talk about in class. When you stand in front of a jury or your peers, your notes are just as good a document as a certified document from the courthouse. It helps you remember things. All that's got to be there. And Frankie, you ought to keep your files. I understand you're supposed to keep certain things in the file for 4 years. Keep everything. Every single thing, no matter what, because there may be a time, rightly or wrongly, you've got to play defense and be prepared for it. And nowadays with scans and things, it's a whole different world. It's much easier. And I don't see any excuse for someone not documenting what they do with the client.
Amen. I will second that. And there's a class that I teach, and I'll be promoting it. It's basically, you know, there's an app for that. Especially rolling out AI technology, there is an app that can do your notes for you automatically. There's an app that can listen to your phone calls and summarize everything for you, put it in a document, and you can save it to your electronic files, and you can print it out and save it in your real files. Like like you said, there is no excuse. The only excuse is that you haven't taken the time to do the research on the Google machine to realize, and most of these apps are free. So a part of what I teach is not just farm and ranch, but I also teach as a broker, there's actually a tool out there to help you, and here's how to use it. Because I do believe in tools, and you and I had an off-topic conversation about AI technology. Any tool in this life is only as good as the person using it. And if you use it wrong, you can hurt yourself and hurt your business. And so I do the same thing for these apps and AI. If you don't know how to fully use it, and mind you, every second of the day, technology changes. That's the other thing we have to remember. Technology is constantly changing, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. So, you know, you may have used that app a month ago, but now that's changed. And so really having that finger on the pulse, and with the newer generation, they're picking up on it faster. But, you know, you have you and your generation, they're having to learn this quickly. You're having to learn about a whole new world. However, you're right, there isn't an excuse. There is so much out there that you can use to protect yourself now more than ever. Even recording conversations back in the day, you know, you had to have a recorder outside of the phone on speaker. Now you have apps that'll, you know, do it for every phone call. I'm glad that you highlighted that. And also, the misconception of saving documents for 4 years, because my thought is your competency is from when you started. So you need to save all of your notes, because you may have to prove your lifetime of this career. And the way you do that is by the transactions and the interactions that you have had in this field. So thank you for bringing that up. There's so much, sometimes we just think this deal's over. And once I experienced a lawsuit and other litigation and things of that nature, and clients going back and forth, it was really shocking and eye-opening that anything's on the table, even if you do absolutely nothing wrong. And I'm not kidding you. I have an amazing client. We bought a ranch. Sellers outright lied about the well. The well was toxic. As soon as we closed on the ranch, my client walked out there, every neighbor ran to him and said, "Do not drink that water. It'll kill your kids. It'll kill your cows." And they're like, "What?" They're like, "What? This family's owned this ranch for 100 and blah, blah, blah years." Well, you know what? When they went and, you know, drilled that oil rig over there and this, that, and the other, you can't drink the water. You can't drink the water. And he's like, "What are you talking about?" So within a matter of a few weeks, we had attorneys on the phone, and they're like, "Yep, they absolutely, not only they disclosed that the wells were good, the agent disclosed that the water was good, everybody disclosed that the water was good. we were having arguments about mineral rights, and I asked my client, I didn't have it written anywhere, which was my one, if I could go back. However, my client is a good client and on my side, thick and thin. And he goes, Lindsay, they boldface told me and put in writing in the disclosures that the well was fine. He goes, the biggest concern everybody had was the mineral rights. We argued for a month over mineral rights. Nobody questioned the water. So what the attorney told him, he goes, I hate to say this to you. He goes, it's going to cost you $50,000 to drill a new well, and it's probably going to cost us about another $50,000 to go to court. He goes, it would actually be easier if we just sued Lindsay for the money to drill your well. And he's like, and I was like, Uncle Carl was like, you got to do what you got to do. He's like, that is just ridiculous. He goes, the people that did wrong should be held accountable. Right. And it's really, I tell agents all the time, it is not about right or wrong. It's who has the best attorney. Because I've seen the right people not present their case well, and the jury sided with the other side. And like you were talking, my other argument to agents is that I said, you better believe the first words out of my mouth as a broker is, when did you send them that IABS form? And where's the proof of that IABS form? And I said, my second question is, when you wrote the contract, where'd you get the legal description? Did you get the legal description from the survey? Because that's the absolute legal description. If you got it from the appraisal district, it could be typed wrong. And
did the surveyor, before they did the survey, get the title commitment to understand what Schedule B says with all the exceptions to title and plot them on the survey? You know, you've heard me talk, probably everybody, that one thing they might remember about me, I hate the T47 document, which is a Department of Insurance document. I think you ought to have a new survey every time you do a transaction, because things change overnight. And people that use an old survey because they're trying to save a couple $1,000s are actually naive in what's out there. And I could tell you some horror stories of some people you'd be very shocked about. I won't say because I can't, but I mean, they didn't know on a huge, over $100 million transaction, to make sure that the surveyor had the commitment for title insurance before they moved forward. Because guess what? When it came back, there were 11 pages of easements, single spaced. That changed the whole nature of the transaction. So, you know, you're exactly right about everything you're saying there. The other thing I'll say about litigation, it is painful, because you and I you could come into Austin, or I can go where you are, and we can go down to the courthouse with the nickel, dimes, and quarters and copy every single document in the judge's file. And there are a lot of things you might want to be private, right? But it's all open record. I mean, you can't even in unless it's involved with the risk to a child, you can't hold any court case records from the public. And, you know, 4 years of discovery waiting to go to trial and all that nightmare, it steals your future. And so you've got to really look. I don't want to keep all that journal reporter. That's crazy. But do you understand, if you don't, and you don't take care of it, then you're going to have a bunch of your future life taken away by something that you could have done now that you could have dealt with it much more quickly. So
I let them know that it's just like anything. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. There's so many more tools out there, and like I said, I'm going to be hosting a class. There's an app for that, and we're going to cover that's information. But it's really important to your career. This is not a hobby. I think that's the other mindset. This is a full-time business. I run an office. I have a business plan. I have an accountant and a CPA, and you know, someone that runs our office. I have a COO, and it's like, you have to, this is no longer kind of a hobbyist, you know, job. We are actually providing a service, and also based on our experience, the type of service. When you're sick and need a brain surgeon, you don't go down to your heart doctor. And you also don't negotiate, the cheapest, who's the cheapest one. You want the best. And it's ironic that when you put real estate as a profession in there, they forget that, you know, this is an actual service, not a commodity. And I don't worry about being replaced by AI technology. I do worry that some agents don't realize, if you don't understand and use the tools, an agent that's using AI technology properly will replace you. And that's just the more you know, the more you grow. It's out there, it's not going away. And you have to bite the bullet and take it upon yourself to invest in that education. And that's the education of just the office work, like you said, filing properly, because you never know when you need that information. And that is a part of our job on top of all the other fiduciary responsibilities in your office. I'm so glad you brought, go ahead.
You mentioned tools, and I wrote a real estate finance class for seniors in accounting and finance at St. Edward's University, taught it several semesters in a row. And, everybody uses Excel spreadsheets and things to do complicated mathematics and discounted cash flow analysis. And I had them do it the old timey way with the big old accounting sheets and spread it out in pencil. Because you can print out that beautiful Excel spreadsheet, but garbage in is garbage out. And when it looks real pretty, you better understand what you're doing. And they fussed at me for a while, but the ones that understood it and got back and were able to balance that spreadsheet on old counting sheets by filling in each little category and each little cell across 24 months, they came back and said, I now understand how important it is to not make a mistake in what you put in. And so tools are only as good as the person that operates those tools. And especially, I think the danger we've got today is that the tools are so good, they'll put out something that looks beautiful, but the underlying foundation is wrong. And you can get tricked into that. You got to be really, really careful. Again, I'm all for using tools, but you've got to teach people what you put into that tool to make it make sense.
Absolutely. And the professional themselves has to understand that it's, at the end of the day, it's their responsibility to take the time to learn. And that's, I think, I hate to say sometimes that they've set the bar so low to let someone in our industry. And then also, unfortunately, these brokers get these newer agents and they're not training them and overseeing them in a way that I believe that we believe it should be done, because it's pretty open. As there's not, hey, you have to have this curriculum. It says, hey, you have to sponsor them and oversee their transactions. And what does that mean? Are you hand holding? Are you listening? Are you reading all their notes? More than likely, no. I'm glad that you touched base on that. And I really wanted to emphasize the legal side of it, because I feel like if you understand what the worst case scenario is and what the reality is on the legal side of things, that, you're a sitting duck, when it comes to that. And also the time, people don't realize it could take 4 years for that discovery. And, now you're looking at a transaction. Well, in the grand scheme of things, if somebody throws out a lawsuit 3 years in, 4 years, that's 7 years from when it actually happened.
That's right. Could be tough. It's real tough.
And then you have to recall all that information.
Oh, yeah. No, that's why you got to have documents and notes in a journal.
Like it was yesterday.
That's right.
Man, I appreciate that. I did want to have a final question kind of on the trial experience. What are memorable, and this could be good, bad, or ugly, what are some of the most memorable experiences you've had in some of these? I need a good story, Mr. Porter.
I've had a few. One time, a judge along the coast in a major case, I was testifying, and the other attorney that was doing cross-examination, we had very experienced attorney that hired me. The other attorney was a young fella. He was extremely arrogant, and he literally defied the judge several times. And our side objected. The judge looked at me and said, Dr. Porter, wait just a second. I've never seen a judge dress down a young attorney like he dressed down that young man. He said, I told you the third time, Dr. Porter's answered that question. In fact, I think he answered it very well, and I like the way he answered it, and you need to be quiet about it. If you bring it up again, I'll have to find you contempt of court. And I'm going like, and then he kind of said, wait, let me ask the question, Dr. Porter, this way. He asked the question for the attorney, show him how to do it, which made me feel great. And I've had other situations like that where judges have stopped both sides and looked at me and said, let me ask you this question, and have me explain the mathematics and things, because they were interested in doing the right thing. One other interesting story I can tell you is sometimes these cases go to trial mostly over the split in attorney's fees. And most people don't understand is, yeah, you win and you're going to get the other side to pay your attorney's fees, but they have to then, your side has to justify the amount of attorney's fees. Anyhow, I was on a case in Dallas. It was a real sad case where a young baby had fallen out of a window and had horrible results. The child didn't die, but it was terrible. And it was so obvious on the management side that they were incompetent and were wrong. But I couldn't quite figure out why we were in trial, because the documents were so clear. They violated so many things. And the judge stopped me in the middle of it, because as we got into my testimony about the duties of that property manager, where they violated Section 8, et cetera, the judge stopped and said, "Stop for a minute, Dr. Porter. I'm going to call recess, and I want you folks in the back that represent the insurance company, all the attorneys, come into my office now." And they came out with a settlement. The judge said, "You're only here to argue about the fact that you're not getting a bigger percentage of those legal fees, and that's it. There's no doubt in my mind that Dr. Porter's right," is what I think he told him. And I'm sitting there in the witness seat for about 2 hours, didn't know what to do, And he came out and said, "You're dismissed, case settled." Wham, next case. So, and that told me that judge was doing his duty. And think about how hard it is for a judge. You and I have a do list of what we do. And once we finish those things, we move on. If you ever done a punch list for a house you're building, if the contractor's smart, he doesn't want a continuing punch list. He wants a punch list that'll finish it up. Well, a judge can never get their docket finished because there's another 3 cases waiting for them every day. So they've got to come in every day and realize, I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm swimming against the tide. And they don't get paid the way they get paid in private practice. And I have nothing but absolute total admiration and respect for any judge. Federal, state, local, district, JP. We're in a litigious society. And years ago, it would take 6 years to go to trial in Harris County before we all started doing mediation. Well, that in itself, when interest is 18%, prime's 18%, that's a tool in itself. Just delay. So anyhow, that's my comments about litigation. I have a bunch of other stories, but there are too many for here.
Well, we will definitely have you on again. Before we finish up, there's a few issues and scenarios I want to throw by you that have come to me recently, more frequently, and I really need help wrapping my brain around how I should approach it. I'm a broker. I'm actually a broker associate under a firm because it just works best for my platform, and obviously my insurance, my E&O insurance. But frequently, I get asked by agents or get a message, and I'm going to give you some real life examples. I had this lady recently. She goes, "Hey, Lindsay, I wanted to touch base with you. I have a client that wants to sell 200 acres. How would I list that property?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you kind of what I said. And I said, congratulations. It's amazing that you have a contact that wants to sell a farm and ranch. It's what I specialize in. Do you have any experience selling ranches? Because in my mind, if you're asking me how to list a ranch and represent a selling client, you've already admitted that you don't know how to do the job.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, I try to be a positive figure and not be the no, you can't do that. I try to be the peer and educate. So you know what, you actually in this scenario, you have 2 choices. You can refer your client to another agent, or you can find maybe a farm and ranch mentor that can put you in their mentor program. But either way, you just have the client, and by definition, that is just a referral. A referral is referring a client to another agent. That's all you have. So
right off the bat, you ask them a question. Who owns the mineral rights? Who has the executive rights to the mineral rights? First thing they'll say is, "I don't know." Well, that's something kind of important. Who have the groundwater rights been severed? What's that mean? Immediately they ought to get the understanding. They're way over their head in this deal right off the bat. To me, I think that's, I mean, you probably have seen I do checklists for people of long checklists of what they should do and look for in water and how they can prove geographic competency. You know, you ask a young agent like that a few questions, and unless they're just stubborn, they need to step back real quick and then refer it until they can learn.
And I think for me, maybe setting up the process or those questions better, like you said, to kind of give them the aha moment to realize that this, this sounds, like I said, magical and exciting and wonderful. Oh my gosh, it'd be great to sell a $2, $3, $4 million ranch. However, unfortunately, even some of the brokers I deal with will be like, hey, can you mentor this agent? And I said, my services aren't for rent. I said, if I'm giving you this information, I said, I now have a fiduciary responsibility to that client.
That's exactly right.
And my new motto is competency equals commission.
Well,
If you're getting paid a commission and you don't have the competency, you've put yourself in a very, very dangerous situation.
One of my goals in teaching farm and ranch is to look at it from day one, 20-something years ago, all aspects of farm and ranch. That's why my class is hard to teach just for 4 hours. It's usually an 8-hour class or more. You really think about all the different elements and characteristics. First of all, walking the land. What are you going to find out there? What do people do over the last 200 years? They dump things in pits and holes, and God knows what's there. They used to, for example, couldn't get an exterminator out, so they used dildering around their house to kill things. Well, those bottles may still be there. So you look for that. You look for hazards. You want to look to see, is there back in the back there? It looked like, hey, there's looks like a little old road that goes through here from gate to gate. It's obviously there are ruts there. Looks like it's been there for a long time. Is that an easement? And then you go back and look at the title commitment, the commitment for title insurance, Schedule B, and there's no easement there. Well, then you better raise a flag, say, then what's the story with this? Do they have, and there's a whole long list of things that farm and ranch brokers got to do. And I guess the most important to me is you've got to be able to understand, first of all, who has authority to make that transaction, right? I'm going to teach a contracts class next week in Kerrville, and the very first thing in the farm and ranch contract is nobody talks about it. I talk a lot about who has authority to sign the contract. And ask the broker this question: do you really want to represent a client or clients that are 14 second cousins that are owning the property they've never walked on? I mean, who has authority to sign the deal? Do you want to have that be a committee decision every time? What if it's tied 7-7? Those are the kind of things you've got to ask. What if you know that the people in the throes of the divorce, what are the temporary papers? Who has a right to sign the transaction? All those things are basic, and that's what my class is about. I write special classes, the contracts class for farm and ranch. And when I was at Trek on the Education Standards Advisory Committee, we added a 3-hour class for contracts. I think it's great. But I lobbied from day one. I said, we don't want a 3-hour class that considers all the contracts. We want a 3-hour class that'll be commercial. A 3-hour class can be whoever wants to teach it. And I said, I'm going to teach farm and ranch only because it's that complicated. 3 hours is not enough, frankly. But at least we focused on that. And so I think I teach the contracts class. I also teach a mineral rights class, which I don't know anybody else teaches. I wrote mineral rights. I have to update it continuously. It's a 3-hour class now. It could be a lot longer class. And the headache with that is I want brokers to understand, and agents, you don't walk out of here and take my class that you're expert enough to get to interpret an oil and gas lease. It's 14 pages long, but at least the language and what to look for and what's important, the basics. I also teach a water rights class. I think I'm the only person ever even tried to write a water rights class. The first one I wrote was in 2003, and it won Best in the State 2005. I've got 4, 7, 2-hour, 1 hour, and 8-hour versions of that class. So I try to not only break it down, not only the whole contract, but I break it down into the segments so you can become more expert in each segment. And then, of course, at Texas Alliance of Land Brokers, which you're a member of, every year we do an 8-hour class in Fredericksburg in November that brings everything up to date with what happens. And, it's a dynamic field. It changes all the time.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited you brought up, some of those hazards, because one of the shorter classes that I'm working on, because I feel like the aha moments and peeling back the layer on farm and ranch isn't always sunshine and rainbows and majestic. I have a class that's, common hazards of farm and ranch real estate. And it starts out anthrax,
Oh yeah,
CW, chronic waste disease, abandoned wells, vats are huge. Me living here in the hill country, a
sure.
lot of people don't even know what a vat is. Most agents can't walk the land and even kind of see, like, that actually looks like there might have been one there. And
Dipping that, right? Yeah, without a doubt.
so I'm really excited to actually get those over to you. But the agents and even the clients, the reason why you hire an expert and you interview agents to represent you that are specializing in farm and ranch is because you need to know how proficient they are, not only in the legal side of understanding the contracts, the in and outs, the documentation. They're documenting, like we talked about, they're documenting on behalf of the client as well. So, understanding, does that agent have that ability? Does that broker have that ability and that knowledge to, one, run the office and the documentation, but then also have the geographical competency to walk out to a place and say, hey, listen, there's some ruts over here. Obviously, somebody's using this road. That could be, it may not have an easement, but you know what? In a court of law, 2 years later, that neighbor could say, well, it's an applied easement, and we go to court, and now you have an easement on your property. There's so many scenarios that if you're not able to see it in a very short amount of time, and like you say, the dipping bats, being able to say, hey, I'm a little concerned. I know that they bought this from an owner and another owner and another owner from the original family that owned it, but no one questioned that. And it is a hazard, and we need to address what that is and what is the remedy cost if it truly is a dipping vat.
Absolutely.
And there are hazards associated with it. I
Absolutely.
love that you brought that up, because I am getting hammered more and more myself in these scenarios where these agents even are to the point of contract. I did have a scenario, and and you want to help these agents, but at the same time, I'm like, hey, you guys are under contract. Did you realize there were three oil and gas easements on this property? And they're like, well, no, the listing agent didn't say anything. The seller didn't say anything. And I said, well, you represent the buyer. I said, one, if you're a farm and ranch agent, you need to map this out with our standard mapping system that will show you if there's general easements on the property. And I said, you have 3 active oil and gas easements. You need to get your client to an attorney right now before the objection to the title commitment comes along, because basically you could have put your clients in danger. I said, what if you went through this transaction and 2 years later they shoot some guy trying to come on their property because they're trying to maintenance the oil line?
Yeah.
And I was like, because they didn't know? I said, that's no excuse.
They need to understand simply that if there's an oil and gas well there, they're the dominant estate to that property. They and some buyer from Dennis from Dallas goes and buys some property, somewhere in the Eagle for Shale area and says, this will be great for dove hunting. Well, guess what? The oil and gas folks have the mineral rights, and they have a lease, and they're above you in use of that property, with exception of certain accommodations, and something new that you do is not going to be accommodated. I mean,
Absolutely.
a lot of people don't understand that. They don't have a clue about it.
Listen, believe me, there's title companies and there's agents that don't even understand what dominant estate means, and we're selling the land on top of it. So it's very concerning, which is why I wanted you to come today and talk about, not to scare agents or deter them from doing farm and ranch, but really you'd have a fiduciary responsibility to every single one of your clients. Your broker has a fiduciary responsibility to those clients. And when you're interviewing those clients to hire them, not just the other way around, to hire you, you're making sure that you're set up for success and they're the right client for you and you're the right broker for them. And that's another class I completely teach, because there are some people, after we go through the interview, I'm like, sorry, I'm not your girl.
No, that's exactly right. You've got to have the courage to say that, and think about how hard that is for a new agent that's trying to make a living doing it. But it's critical they understand that when you get that feeling that that client's not going to do the right thing, the way you can stay out of that lawsuit is walk away from that listing, period. And I see a lot of young agents desperate for money that'll go ahead, and then next thing you know, it's a disaster.
And it's not just agents, it's brokers too. They
Sure.
you know, at the end of the day, we work on commission and we don't get paid until we close the deal. And in our classes, we remind everybody, listen, time is money. And if you're spending time with the wrong client, think of how many right ones you've missed.
You're missing the opportunity for something else.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to wrap us up on the landowner side of things. So, what advice, you being a broker and actually buying and selling, what advice would you give farm and ranch owners looking to buy property in today's market, considering the economics and the economy and the landscape here?
I think first thing they've got that if you're going out to buy something, the first thing you need to do in Texas, even East Texas, is what is the water situation for the property? Has the groundwater rights been severed? What is the groundwater availability? Do you have a surface water permit? We're going to continue to be in drought due to whatever reason, climate change, global warming, whatever. I mean, historically, we're always in drought.
Cedar.
Yeah.
Cedar trees.
Yeah. Oh, everything you can think of. And plus all these people coming to Texas pulling the water resource we got. So first you've got to look at water, I think, above all else. Secondly, you've got to force the issue. If the seller doesn't want to give you a current survey, then you need to have the guts to go out and do one yourself, period. And you've got to wait till you get the title commitment, because the surveyor is not going to go down the real property records and look into that. And you're going to want to tell that surveyor that I want everything, the easements. Not only do I want all that on the cartouche in the map, I want that survey that shows where the flood zones are. I want every easement plotted there. I want to see exactly what I'm looking at to buy, and I want to have enough time to assess that for me, right? If it's going to take 2 weeks for the title commitment and 4 weeks for the survey, then I better get a feasibility period that's 8 or 10 weeks. I want to have time to cure. So you've got to look at it that way. You got to get out. If you're going to look at a piece of property, you need to go first to see the AgriLife extension agent, understand what's going on in that county if you don't understand that, and then get access to the property. And I mean, it's not fun walking 7,000 acres in Rock Springs in August. But if you're a serious buyer, you got to get out there and walk it. You've got to get out and not only drive your truck, you got to walk the perimeter. I mean, it's tough to do. You've got to find out there for sure. Anthrax sits in the dirt. It sits there for years. You can see all kinds of things. So I think you've got to get back and look at that. Of course, the next thing you do, and I can do a lot, I can talk about this for hours. You want to go to the appraisal district, see what's there, see what they have. They're more accurate than they've ever been. And you've got to realize, do they have an ag valuation? You don't say ag exemption because you're not exempt from taxes, but you have an ag valuation which reduces the amount of taxes. What if they're doing something on the site that has already changed the use of the property, like there's half the property is now a solar field? Well, what about rollback taxes? That's a change in use. I mean, all that, as a buyer, you've got to get back and see. And above all else, when I gave a speech to the Hill Country Cattle Women recently, I said, how do we make money from our property? How do we pay for this property and let the property pay for itself? What's out there? Well, maybe solar power. You may have an opportunity. There's still two big companies out in Junction that actually come and pull 30-year-old cedar stumps and not only break them up into, shred them up into cattle bedding, but also pull out the essence of those old cedar trees. That's some money that you can make. The new thing are exotic animals for the last 30 or 40 years. There's a good side and a bad side to that. But I was on a ranch in Presidio where the old fella has 52 M's box, which are oryx that came from South Africa. Well, they're $10,000 each. Start out with a herd of 20. Now those are dangerous critters, and you got to drop a net over from a helicopter and hope you get enough juice in them to knock them out. But I mean, he was smart enough to know that that's the only way to make that land. We can't keep depending on these high dollar ranches getting paid for by investors from big deals elsewhere. I mean, a lot of these big deal investors, because of the economy, think at the devastation. It's worse than you can ever imagine. I promise you that, in the office building world. I mean, we've got major offices in Houston that have been through foreclosure. We'll admit in Houston right now, around the Galleria in downtown Houston, there's $500 million of delinquencies in commercial mortgage-backed securities. Now, since those are private securities, they're probably not really wanting to admit what it may be. I think it's $1.5 billion. And I think that paradigm has shifted. So those folks that were investing in those deals, when those deals go bad, they don't have the money to go buy a ranch in Presidio. I think everything's going to change. Interest rates have made a big difference. I think a tremendous difference. We also have a problem with that no matter which side of the fence you're on, the federal government likes to get in and be involved in one thing. They like to monkey with our water because they know that'll control the growth. And we've got a conflict constantly going on between federal and state rules and jurisdiction. The water's the United States, really. There are 3 more big lawsuits about it because the feds are ignoring the Sackett decision that came out last year. I think again, to sum it up, as a buyer's agent, a buyer looking for land, it's a great place to store money. And the land's not going to lie to you if you tell yourself the truth. You know, they're going to lie. There may be some misunderstandings when you're buying a stock in New York, but if you understand that land, it's not going to lie to you. And you've got to depend on an experienced real estate broker that can help you understand the characteristics and nature of that land. And I think, to me, for the rest of my life and my whole life, the best investment on earth is farm and ranch property.
I would have to agree with you, sir. And my background, actually, my specialty is in hunting ranches, exotic game ranches, and rural properties.
So you know what I'm talking about.
I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. However, at this time, it could be a very lucrative business, no different than breeding horses or cattle. That's right. In that aspect, and also the commodity of hunting. I'm a huge hunter. And like I said, I can talk about that all day in my profession and investments of land in general, and even low value land that's still cheap right now. It may look tough, but a lot of I've actually sold a ranch to some South Africans, and they'll tell you straight up, hey, part of Rock Springs looks like Africa, and these animals do really well here.
Absolutely.
So the lower we can buy a price per acre, the better. And some people look at that land and they're like, I wouldn't give it away. This stuff is terrible. Yeah.
But it's heaven for those oryx.
it's for a lot of those rough animals, let me tell you. And you know, going back to the diversity, not just of the landscape of Texas as a state, from the Panhandle to the Rio Grande Valley, and just the knowledge that you have to have in the ins and outs and intricacies of a proper transaction to make it fair for both the buyer and the seller. But also that agent understanding and representation of the buyer and sellers, the things that they can do to prepare their client for the best decision they can make to move forward, and understand what they're getting into sometimes for a lifetime or a legacy of that ranch. So, man, I just want to say thank you so much for covering so much with us today. For those that are listening, Dr. Porter's information, as well as I'm going to get a link to where you can find some of his courses if you'd like to take and learn more, or advance your education as a farm and ranch agent. I've taken, you know, he teaches, you know, several different classes. I've taken them over and over again, because let me tell you, it's just like visiting Big Bend, you know, in down in the southwest part of Texas. You go for a weekend and you've only seen this much. I said, I listened to his class and I only absorbed like that much, but I want to come back for more. So, once again, thank you. You've been an amazing guest, a wealth of knowledge, sir.
I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did. We will have you back.
Okay.